to the future. Could it actually happen with a real time machine?
In 1997, a self-taught electrician stepped into a machine he had built inside his own garage and vanished. No remains were ever found. Just a completely burned garage, a note sealed inside a metal toolbox, and 29 years of silence. Then in 2022, he suddenly appeared. Older, exhausted, carrying a wooden box full of journals and a secret he claimed the world wasn't ready for. What he brought back was not proof of time travel. It was something far worse, something that had no name. The mouse that died, and the moment Mike stopped being stoppable. Before Mike Markham ever attempted to build a time machine, he had already crossed lines that should have stopped him cold. Mike had been arrested and served time in jail. He had once wired together 6 stolen industrial transformers inside his garage. The power he pulled from the grid was so extreme that it damaged equipment and caused outages in nearby homes. Most people would have stopped after something like that, but Mike did not think like most people. Mike spent months running unsanctioned experiments in that same garage. Without any formal training or guidance, he built a device that created a strong electromagnetic field between 2 metal rods. When he activated the machine and directed a laser beam through the field, he observed something he could not explain. Objects placed between the rods disappeared completely and then returned moments later in the exact same position. They did not move or shift. They simply vanished and came back. A wooden block was the first clear result. It disappeared for 3 seconds and returned extremely cold, far colder than the surrounding air. It felt as though it had been exposed to a completely different environment. Mike then placed a fresh flower into the field. When it returned, it was wilted and browned, as though several days had passed for it during those few seconds. These results convinced him that the machine was not just displacing objects. It was sending them somewhere else, somewhere with different conditions that affected them in real time. Then Mike placed a live mouse between the rods. He turned on the machine and watched as the mouse disappeared for 5 seconds. During that time, there was nothing to see. The space was empty. When the mouse returned, it was alive and breathing. But something was clearly wrong. The animal moved in unsteady circles and behaved in a way that suggested severe neurological damage. It did not appear frightened in a normal sense. Its movements were disorganized and unnatural, as though its internal systems were no longer functioning properly. Mike observed it closely and continued taking notes instead of shutting the machine down. The mouse refused to eat. For the rest of that day, there were no additional changes. 2 days later, it died. Its body showed no signs of injury. There were no burns, no wounds, and no visible cause of death. Something had happened to that mouse during those 5 seconds, something powerful enough to kill it without leaving any trace. Mike did not see this as a warning. He saw it as confirmation. To him, the experiment proved that the machine could affect living tissue in the same way it affected objects. It convinced him that he was getting closer to understanding what the machine was doing. Mike decided that he would not use another animal. He chose himself as the next subject. But why was Mike willing to step into a machine that had just killed a living creature? The answer starts at the beginning with a kid in rural Missouri who had no degrees, no funding, and an obsessive love for electricity long before anyone noticed him. The boy who loved things that threw sparks, and the accident that started everything. Mike grew up in rural Missouri during the 1970s and 80s, far from supervision and without any real structure in his life. No one guided him toward science, and no one warned him about its risks either. Mike taught himself through library books that he often struggled to fully understand. After reading, he would return home and attempt to recreate what he had learned, even when the concepts were beyond his level of experience. Behind a rented farmhouse, Mike converted an old garage into a personal workshop. He filled the space with salvaged parts, broken appliances, stripped wiring, and anything else he could find. Over time, Mike began building high-voltage devices such as Tesla coils and Jacob's ladders. He became deeply interested in how electricity behaved under extreme conditions. Mike later admitted that he never had a clear goal. He simply wanted to observe what would happen if he pushed electrical systems beyond their normal limits. That approach eventually led him to something he could not explain. One night, Mike set up a standard Jacob's ladder on his workbench. The device consisted of two metal rods positioned close together at the bottom and farther apart at the top. When powered, an electric arc formed between the rods and climbed upward as expected. The sound was sharp and continuous, and the light was intense. At first, everything appeared normal. Then Mike introduced a small change. He positioned a simple laser pointer so that its beam passed directly through the arc. Initially, there was no obvious difference. The arc continued to rise and the sound remained the same. However, after watching closely, Mike began to notice subtle changes. The arc appeared more stable. It followed a tighter path and maintained its shape longer than it normally would. The movement looked more controlled, which did not match his previous observations. Mike then placed a small metal screw near the rods. He expected it to shift slightly or fall due to vibration. Instead, the screw appeared to flicker. It remained in the same position, but for a brief moment, it completely disappeared. Almost immediately, it returned to the exact spot where it had been. Mike stopped what he was doing and turned off the machine. The sudden silence in the garage felt unsettling. He tried to explain the event as a visual distortion caused by the brightness of the arc. Mike told himself that the intense light must have interfered with his vision. Although this explanation sounded reasonable, it did not fully convince him. The following day, Mike repeated the experiment with greater care. He used small objects such as washers and coins and placed them in the same area between the rods. He adjusted the voltage, changed the position of the laser, and altered the distance between the rods. Mike carefully recorded each step in a series of notebooks that quickly filled with measurements and sketches. At first, nothing unusual happened. Then, without any clear pattern, the effect returned. An object would remain in place and suddenly vanish. It would not move or fall. It would simply stop being visible. After a brief moment, it would reappear in exactly the same position. Each time it returned, it showed no signs of damage. There was no heat, no distortion, and no indication that it had been physically affected. At that point, Mike faced a clear decision. He could dismiss the events and stop experimenting, or he could accept that something unusual was taking place and continue investigating. Mike chose to continue. He began documenting everything with greater urgency. As the effect became more consistent, Mike's concern grew alongside his curiosity. Mike needed someone else to hear this. He needed confirmation that he was not losing his mind. So he picked up the phone and called Coast to Coast AM, the legendary late-night radio show hosted by Art Bell, a man known for giving serious airtime to the kind of stories no mainstream outlet would touch. What Bell said that night did not slow Mike down. It gave him permission to go further. The voice on late-night radio, and the invitation that made everything worse. Mike told Art Bell that he had built a device in his garage. He said it could make objects vanish from reality for fractions of a second. He said they came back exactly where they had been. Mike sounded nervous. He stumbled over his words. He sounded like a man who had spent too much time alone with something he could not explain. Bell calmly listened to him. He did not laugh. He did not dismiss Mike. Bell asked one question that mattered. How do you know the object disappears? Could it just be an optical illusion from the arc? Mike did not hesitate. I know it disappears because I can feel it, he said. When the field hits right, everything in the garage feels wrong. The air feels like it's holding its breath, and I'm not the only one who notices. My dog won't come near the garage anymore. Birds won't land on the roof. Something about that field makes living things want to be somewhere else. Art Bell had hosted Coast to Coast AM for years. He had heard every kind of claim imaginable from every kind of person. He did not go quiet easily, but after Mike said that, there was a pause, a real one. Then Bell responded carefully. He told Mike to document everything. He told him to record video and call back. Bell meant caution. Mike heard approval. Months passed before Mike called again. What happened in between made everything worse. He ran out of power. The equipment he built from scrap could not push the effect further. Mike needed more voltage, so he made a decision that crossed a line. He stole 6 industrial transformers from a rural electrical substation, dragged them back to his garage, and wired them together. The power surge was so extreme that lights dimmed across several neighboring properties. Utility investigators traced it straight to him. Police arrested Mike, 60 days in county jail for theft and reckless endangerment. That should have been the end of it. It made him worse. Inside the cell, Mike did not slow down. He filled pages with diagrams. He refined calculations and planned a stronger system he could build legally. He walked out more focused, more committed, and more dangerous than when he walked in. When Mike called Coast to Coast AM again later that year, Bell noticed it immediately. The hesitation was gone. His voice sounded darker and more urgent, like he was running out of time. Mike told Bell he had rebuilt everything legally this time, improved design, stabilized laser, increased voltage, and the results were no longer small. "Objects aren't just flickering anymore, Bell," Mike said. "They're gone for seconds, sometimes longer, and when they come back, sometimes they come back wrong." Mike gave examples. A wooden block returned ice cold. A flower came back aged and wilted. A mouse survived the test but died within 2 days. Bell did not entertain it this time. His voice changed in a way his longtime listeners had never heard before. The curiosity drained out completely, and something that sounded like genuine fear took its place. Bell told Mike directly, "You need to stop experimenting alone. Contact real scientists. Get oversight. This is beyond what one person should be doing in a garage." Mike did not argue. He didn't need to. You could hear it in the way he answered that he had already decided where this was going. And then came the final call. What Mike described that night did not sound like an experiment anymore. It sounded like a point of no return. The final call, the fire, and the note in the toolbox. By late February 1996, Mike sounded like an entirely different person. When he called Coast to Coast AM for the last time, the audience expected another strange update. What they got felt like a warning. Mike said he had expanded the field. It was no longer limited to small objects on a table. It filled a larger space now. It reached far enough for him to step into it. Mike did not rush when he explained it. "It's like everything slows down except you," he said. "You can see things happening in slow motion. You can move between seconds. And when you step out, you realize more time has passed than you experienced, like you were gone longer than you thought." No one spoke for a moment. The silence stretched long enough to feel uncomfortable. Then Bell asked what everyone was thinking. "Mike, are you telling me you've built a time machine?" Mike did not answer right away. When he did, his voice sounded careful. "I don't know if it's time travel, but it's something. The field disrupts normal perception or normal reality. I can't tell which. But I'm close, Bell. I just need more power and a better stabilizer." That was the moment things stopped sounding like curiosity and started sounding like obsession. Bell tried to pull Mike back again. He told Mike to involve real scientists. He told him to stop working alone. He told him not to push this any further without oversight. Mike did not argue directly. Instead, he shifted the conversation. He started talking about cars he did not recognize parked along his road. He mentioned people watching his house from a distance. Mike said he believed someone was monitoring what he was doing. It sounded like paranoia. It also sounded like a man who had isolated himself far too long. The call ended with a promise. "I'll call back in March. I'll have proof. Video, measurements, everything you've asked for." That call never came. By March 1997, Mike had disappeared completely. His phone stopped working. Letters sent to him came back unopened. The farmhouse looked empty to anyone who passed by. Then the garage mysteriously burned down. The fire destroyed almost everything inside. Investigators found melted copper and ruined transformers scattered across the floor. The damage looked intense, but one detail stood out. A 6-foot circular burn pattern marked the concrete floor. It was too clean, too precise. It did not match a normal electrical fire. The investigators searched for a body but found nothing. There was no remains. No trace of Mike anywhere. But one thing survived. Inside a metal toolbox, shielded from the worst of the heat, they found a handwritten note. The paper was intact. The message was short. "It's not about time, it's about how you see things." Investigators closed the case with a simple conclusion. They believed Mike fled before the fire. They suggested he might have started it himself. The missing person report went nowhere. Outside official channels, the story spread fast. By the summer of 1997, Mike became an internet legend. Forums filled with theories. Some claimed time travel. Others believed the government silenced him. Some said Mike opened something he could not close. Then another detail surfaced, and it sent the forums into a frenzy. In the summer of 1998, a researcher found a news clipping from 1930. It described a body discovered on a California beach. The man looked around 30 years old. His clothing did not match the era. In his pocket, investigators had found a small metal device covered in buttons and unidentifiable symbols. The photo was grainy, but people enhanced it. What they saw made them stop. The device had what appeared to be LED indicators and a design language that matched sketches Mike had described on air. The layout looked exactly like something a 1990s tinkerer would build, not something a man in 1930 would have on his person. The theory spread fast. People began to believe Mike had traveled back to 1930 and died there. The case remained unanswered and unresolved for 30 years. Then in September 2006, a physics professor in Oregon, Dr. Harold Voss, opened his email and found a message that made the hair on his arms stand up. Because the sender claimed to be Mike Markham, and what he sent along with that message suggested he was not dead at all. He was somewhere far stranger than dead. The email from nowhere, and the box hidden before its time. The message Dr. Voss received was short. It did not try to convince him. It did not explain everything. It sounded like someone in a hurry. "I know people think I'm dead. I'm not. But I'm not exactly here either. The machine worked, but not how I thought. I'm sending you diagrams. Third-generation vortex stabilization frame. Don't build it, just study it. Understand what I couldn't." The diagrams attached to the email looked advanced. They showed complex circuit designs, field equations, and detailed notes about biological side effects. The warnings were specific. They read like someone who had learned through trial and damage. Dr. Voss read the message 3 times. Then he tried to respond. The reply failed immediately. The address no longer existed. Dr. Voss traced the origin of the email. It led to a public library in Kauai, Hawaii. Authorities checked the location. No staff member remembered anyone matching Mike's description. It was another lead that disappeared as soon as someone followed it. Years passed. No sightings, no signals, nothing. Then came 2022, and everything changed. Andrew and Melanie Carter had just bought an old farmhouse in rural Ohio. The place needed work, so they started with the attic. While removing insulation, they found something hidden deep in a corner. A heavy wooden box covered in dust, undisturbed for years. A label was fixed to the top. "Mr. Markham, do not open until the right time." The couple opened it anyway. Inside were dozens of journals filled with handwritten notes and circuit diagrams. The date started in 1995. They did not stop there. The entries continued all the way to 2021. Someone had been writing for 26 years after Mike vanished. The box also held circuit boards, some burned and warped, others untouched, each one carefully wrapped and stored. At the bottom they found a photograph. It was a Polaroid. The image showed a man standing beside a large ring-shaped metal frame. The date stamp read June 21st, 2021. On the back, someone had written a single line. "It did work, but not the way I thought it would." Then they found the detail that changed everything. One of the journals listed their exact address, the same farmhouse, the same room they were standing in. Next to it was a note. "Magnetic field stability optimal. Safe storage location." They will find it when the time is right. Andrew and Melanie checked the purchase records. They had only owned the house for a short time. There was no clear way anyone could have predicted they would end up there. Yet the note suggested exactly that. They posted everything online. Within hours, the story spread. People who had followed Mike for decades saw it. The reactions came fast and loud. Then something happened that no one expected. 3 weeks after the post, Andrew received a phone call. There was no caller ID. He answered anyway. The voice on the other end sounded tired and older than it should have been, but it was familiar. "This is Mike Markham. I hear you found my box. I'd like to explain what happened. Can I come visit?" Mike eventually did visit the Carters. What he told the couple did not just explain where he had been, it reframed every detail of the story from the very beginning. The truth about the machine, and what it actually did to Mike Markham. Mike arrived at the Carter farmhouse looking far older than his age. His face was lined and worn. His posture was heavy and slumped. He carried a burden that no one else could see. Mike sat down with Andrew and Melanie. He did not begin with small talk. He did not attempt to ease into the story. Mike started immediately with the truth. "The machine did not move me through time," Mike said. "It desynchronized me from everyone else. I remained in the same places at the same moments, but I was out of phase. It was like a radio tuned slightly off frequency. You can hear the music, but it sounds fuzzy and distant. You are present, but not quite there." Mike told them about March 1997, the night of the fire. By that time, he had completed his third-generation machine. It was far more powerful than anything he had built before. "The field stabilized, and I stepped fully into it," he said. "There was no flash of light. There was no sudden movement. There was no dramatic visual effect. I only felt a quiet disconnection. The world shifted slightly, and I stayed in place." When Mike stepped out, the environment appeared normal. Hours had passed. The machine had overheated, and the garage was on fire. He escaped the fire, but the world around him had already begun to change. Mike tried contacting people he knew. Friends recognized his face, but they could not recall his name. His landlord remembered renting to someone, but he could not remember any details. Phone numbers he had used days before no longer worked. "I did not disappear," Mike said. "I simply became hard to find and hard to remember. People's brains could not hold on to the idea of me." Mike explained that every exposure to the machine's field before that night had compounded the effect. Each partial step into the field increased the desynchronization. Each exposure made him slightly less perceivable to the people around him. Mike could not hold a job. It was not because he was fired. His coworkers simply forgot that he had worked there. Mike could not maintain a bank account. Clerks could not remember opening one for him. He lived in places where no one needed to remember him for long. Mike spent all his time studying the physics of what he had done to himself. "The machine did not manipulate time," he said. "It manipulated perception and memory. It manipulated the quantum probability states that determine whether a person can be observed and remembered. Every person exists because others remember them. Memory creates reality. I destroyed my ability to be remembered." Mike had come to the Carters because the effect was reaching a terminal stage. He would not die, but he would become completely unmemorable. Soon, he would exist in the physical world while no one could retain him in their mind. Mike explained that he had prepared this moment decades earlier. He had hidden the box in a location with optimal magnetic field stability. He had recorded the Carters' future address in the journals. He had waited for the right people to find it before he slipped too far. Before Mike left, he made 3 requests. He asked them to send the journals to a private archive for safe study. He also asked them to lock the attic because some equipment remained magnetically active. Then he finally asked them to never try to contact him again. The Carters agreed. Mike thanked them, stood up, walked to the door, and left. What Andrew and Melanie felt in the minutes after that door closed was not ordinary loss or ordinary confusion. It was something with no name. Something Mike had warned them was coming, and it was already starting. Unmemory, the slow erasure of a man who is still alive. The moment Mike stepped out of the Carter farmhouse, both Andrew and Melanie felt something strange happening inside their own minds. They realized that they could not hold on to the memory of his face without conscious effort. They tried to picture him clearly. But even while concentrating, his face began to disappear. The disappearance did not happen like a dream fading when you first wake up from sleep. It did not drift naturally from their minds. It felt purposeful, as if some force was actively removing the memory. The image of Mike was being erased while they were still aware of it. Within minutes, Melanie grabbed a notepad and began writing down everything she could remember about Mike. She wrote his appearance, his expressions, the sound of his voice, and the words he had spoken. She could feel the details slipping away while she wrote them. The memory was leaving in real time, while Mike was still presumably walking down their driveway. Andrew had a similar experience. He stared at the wall while trying to recall the sound of Mike's voice, but quickly realized he could not reconstruct it accurately. The memory of how Mike had spoken was already fading. Within an hour, both Andrew and Melanie were reading their own notes as if someone else had written them. The handwriting was theirs. The words were theirs. The content of the notes was theirs. However, the living memory of the conversation, the experience of sitting with Mike, was no longer present in their minds. The memory was like a dream they knew had been important, but could no longer describe. Years later, Andrew and Melanie described the encounter like a half-remembered movie. They know it really happened because the journals are still there, the Polaroid is still there, the circuit boards are still there, their own handwritten notes are still there. But the living memory of hearing Mike's voice and seeing him sit across from them is almost entirely gone. This is what unmemory looks like. Unmemory is not the same as forgetting, which happens naturally over time. Unmemory is deliberate and precise. It removes a person's presence from the minds of others while the physical evidence of their existence remains intact. Since Mike left the farmhouse, there have been occasional unverified sightings. Some people report a man matching his description asking technical questions at university physics departments. Some people report a man introducing himself as Mike Markham at conferences, but no one remembers him afterward. Other people report encounters with a man who has extraordinary technical knowledge at shelters and temporary residences, but he never stays long enough for anyone to learn his name. These sightings are only traces. They are the fading presence of a man who is becoming less and less perceivable to others over time. The journals were sent to a private research archive as Mike requested. The attic where the remaining equipment was stored was locked. Somewhere in the world, Mike Markham continues to exist. He is still breathing. He is still moving through the same physical space as other people. However, he is like a radio signal without a receiver tuned to it. He is real, continuous, and entirely alone because no one can perceive him clearly. The note in the toolbox said it plainly. Mike may have understood it from the very beginning, even if he could not have known the full consequences. It read, "It is not about time. It is about how you see things."